The Westlake Files. Episode 2, The Mirror Man. Narrated by Dr. Chin. Disclaimer. The story you're about to hear contains themes involving homicide, violence, childhood trauma, and psychological distress. As always, names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect client confidentiality. Viewer discretion is advised. Some cases end when the killer is caught. Some cases end when a jury delivers a verdict. And some cases never really end at all. They follow people home. They sit beside them at dinner. They wake them in the middle of the night. They become part of who they are. Tonight's story is about one of those cases. A case that began with a body behind a church. A case that eventually claimed 7 lives. A case that destroyed the career of one of the most respected detectives I have ever met. Not because she failed, because she succeeded. Her name is not really Ava Reyes. But for tonight, that's what we'll call her. Chapter 1, Detective Reyes. There are certain people who seem born for law enforcement. Ava Reyes was one of them. By 32, she had earned a reputation that most detectives spend an entire career chasing. Disciplined, intelligent, relentless. The detective who remembered witness statements months later. The detective who noticed details others overlooked. The detective who volunteered for the difficult cases nobody wanted. Most importantly, she cared. That may sound insignificant. It was. Because caring is often what separates good detectives from great ones. It is also what destroys them. Analysis. People often assume justice-oriented individuals possess an unusually strong moral compass. That's true. But there is a downside. People who strongly identify with being good sometimes struggle to recognize their own mistakes. Not because they're dishonest, because they genuinely believe their actions are justified. That distinction will become important later. Chapter 2, The First Body. The call came in shortly after sunrise. Male. Mid-40s. Discovered behind a neighborhood church. At first glance, the scene appeared straightforward. No robbery. No gang indicators. No obvious motive. Just a dead man. Unfortunately for everyone involved. Appearances can be deceiving. Ava arrived 20 minutes later. The morning air still carried the smell of recent rain. Patrol officers had already secured the area. Crime scene technicians were processing evidence. The victim lay partially concealed behind a row of hedges. One look told Ava something was wrong. Not with the victim. With the scene itself. Everything felt deliberate. Organized. Intentional. As though someone wanted the body found. Then she saw it. A small drawing resting beside the victim's hand. A simple sketch. Nothing elaborate. Just a mirror. Drawn in black ink. At the time, nobody thought much of it. In fact, the drawing nearly ended up in an evidence box labeled miscellaneous. Months later, everyone would wish they paid closer attention. Chapter 3, The Second Body. 3 weeks later, another victim appeared. And beside that victim, another mirror. The same drawing. The same style. The same impossible question. Why? And more importantly, who was the message for? Chapter 4, The Man Without Enemies. The victim's name was Thomas Greer. 46 years old. Divorced. Accountant. No criminal history. No gang affiliations. No known enemies. The type of victim homicide detectives secretly dread. Not because the murder is more tragic. Because it's harder. When a victim has enemies, investigators have a starting point. A direction. A motive. Thomas Greer had none. Or so it appeared. Ava spent 3 days reconstructing his life. Bank records, phone records, work history, relationships, medical history. Every detail. Nothing stood out. At least nothing obvious. His coworkers described him as quiet, reliable, forgettable. His neighbors said almost the same thing. The man barely existed in people's memories. Yet someone had gone through considerable effort to kill him, which meant there was something missing. There always was. On the fourth day, Ava returned to the crime scene photographs. Not because she expected to find something new. Because experience had taught her that difficult cases often hide answers in plain sight. She stared at the image for nearly 20 minutes. The body, the position, the mirror drawing, the placement. Then she noticed something strange. The drawing wasn't facing investigators. It was facing the victim, almost as though the mirror had been left for him. Not for police, not for the media, for the victim himself. She wrote a note in her case journal. A simple observation. Nothing more. Mirror intended for victim. Years later, she would revisit that note dozens of times. Because hidden inside it was the first clue. The clue that should have told her what kind of killer she was hunting. Analysis. Most people think serial killers enjoy being seen. Some do. Others want something different. Recognition. Validation. Acknowledgement. The mirror symbol wasn't random. Symbols almost never are. The killer wasn't merely leaving evidence. He was communicating. The question wasn't what the mirror meant. The question was who it was meant for. Chapter 5, Body Number 2. The second victim appeared 23 days later. Female. 51. Found inside her home. Again, there were no signs of robbery. No obvious sexual motive. No connection to organized crime. And once again, the mirror appeared. This time placed neatly on a kitchen table. Drawn on a torn piece of notebook paper. Almost childish. The kind of sketch a student might make during class. The media noticed immediately. 2 victims. 2 mirrors. The possibility of a serial offender. Public pressure mounted. City officials demanded updates. Reporters crowded the station lobby. Every television network wanted answers. Unfortunately, the investigators had none. Ava studied both victims side by side. Age, occupation, social circles, religious affiliations, financial records. Nothing. No overlap. No connection. No explanation. It was like trying to solve a puzzle using pieces from different boxes. Until a forensic analyst made a discovery. A small one. Almost insignificant. Both victims had volunteered at youth programs years earlier. Not the same program. Not the same organization. Just youth-related work. The connection was weak. Possibly meaningless. But it was the first connection they had. So Ava pulled the thread. Chapter 6, The Hero Complex. The third body changed everything. Because patterns require repetition. And repetition had finally arrived. The third victim had also spent years working with troubled teenagers. Suddenly coincidence became unlikely. Very unlikely. 3 victims. 3 individuals connected to youth outreach. 3 mirrors. 1 killer. The task force expanded. Additional detectives joined the investigation. Behavioral analysts were consulted. Psychologists offered theories. Former offenders were interviewed. Everyone wanted to understand the same thing. Why these people? One profiler proposed a theory. The killer may have viewed himself as a victim. Someone targeting individuals he believed had harmed him in the past. someone acting from a distorted sense of justice. The theory wasn't universally accepted, but Ava couldn't stop thinking about it, because the more she learned about the victims, the less perfect they appeared. The second victim had received complaints years earlier. Nothing criminal, just accusations of inappropriate treatment of program participants. The third victim had been investigated by his employer. Again, nothing proven. Nothing chargeable. Just allegations. Rumors. Concerns. Questions. Questions. That word kept appearing. Questions around all three victims. Questions that never became charges. Questions that never became convictions. Questions that quietly disappeared. Ava felt a growing discomfort she couldn't explain. Not fear. Recognition. A strange sense that she had seen this pattern before. Heard it before. Lived it before. But every time she reached for the memory, it slipped away. Analysis. Memory is often portrayed as a filing cabinet. Open the drawer. Retrieve the file. Simple. Reality is far messier, particularly when trauma is involved. Traumatic memories rarely arrive in order. They arrive in fragments. Emotions. Images. Sensations. Ava wasn't remembering facts. She was remembering feelings. And feelings can be remarkably difficult to interpret. Chapter 7, The Note. The fourth murder occurred 6 weeks later. And for the first time, the killer left more than a mirror. He left a message. Just 6 words. Written carefully. Deliberately. Almost elegantly. You taught me how to see. The note stunned investigators. Not because of its content, because of its implications. The killer knew at least one victim personally. Possibly all of them. The murders weren't random. They were targeted. Intentional. Meaningful. Most detectives saw a clue. Ava saw something else. A feeling. A knot forming in her stomach. Because the sentence felt familiar. Not the handwriting. Not the wording. The emotion. The idea. The sentiment. Somewhere in her past, someone had said something similar. And for the first time since the investigation began, she was afraid. Not of the killer. Of what she might remember. End of Part 1. Part 2, The Splinter. Chapter 8, The Splinter. There is a misconception about memory. People imagine it works like a library. A place where experiences are neatly cataloged and stored. Find the correct shelf. Pull the correct book. Retrieve the correct answer. Simple. Predictable. Reliable. Unfortunately, memory doesn't work that way. Especially when emotion is involved. Especially when regret is involved. Some memories don't disappear. They sink. They settle somewhere deep beneath the surface. And years later, when something brushes against them, they begin to hurt. Like a splinter buried under skin. Invisible, but impossible to ignore. Detective Ava Reyes had spent most of her career trusting her instincts. Those instincts had solved murders, found missing children, prevented innocent people from being charged. Her instincts were one of her greatest strengths. So when the killer's note continued bothering her, she listened. Not because she thought she knew the killer, because she believed she had overlooked something. Something important. Something obvious. Something her subconscious understood before she did. The note sat on her desk. Photographed. Scanned. Analyzed. Cataloged. 6 words. Nothing more. You taught me how to see. By the end of the week, she had read it over 100 times. The wording wasn't the problem. The problem was the feeling it created. A strange familiarity she couldn't explain. like hearing a song she hadn't heard since childhood. Not enough to remember, just enough to know she should. Chapter 9, The Connection. 3 days later, a breakthrough arrived. Not from Ava. From a young analyst named Trevor. 26 years old. Quiet. Meticulous. The type of investigator who spent hours staring at spreadsheets most people would abandon after 10 minutes. He walked into the task force briefing, carrying a stack of papers. Think I found something. Nobody paid much attention. Not at first. The room was exhausted. The investigation was receiving constant media pressure. Every lead so far had gone nowhere. Another possible connection felt like another dead end. Then Trevor began talking, and the room got very quiet. The 4 victims had all been connected to youth rehabilitation programs. Everyone already knew that. What Trevor discovered was more specific. Years earlier, all 4 had crossed paths with the same organization. Not simultaneously, not in the same roles, but their names appeared repeatedly throughout its records. Volunteer rosters, fundraising events, staff directories, consulting contracts, community partnerships, different years, different responsibilities, same organization. The organization was called Westbridge Youth Services, a residential rehabilitation program for troubled adolescents. It had closed nearly 12 years earlier. Ava felt her stomach tighten. Immediately. Unexpectedly. Violently. Not because she recognized the name. Because she recognized the feeling. The same feeling she'd experienced while reading the note. The same feeling she'd experienced studying the victims. The same feeling she still couldn't explain. Analysis. Human beings often mistake recognition for memory. They are not the same thing. Recognition comes first. Memory comes later. Ava wasn't remembering Westbridge. She was recognizing it. And recognition is often where the trouble begins. Because once the mind detects something familiar, it starts searching for answers. Sometimes desperately. Chapter 10, The Briefing. The task force spent the next 2 hours discussing Westbridge. Most investigators remained skeptical. The connection felt weak. Old. Distant. The captain listened patiently before finally speaking. How many youth programs exist in this city? Nobody answered. Because the answer was obvious. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. The captain nodded. So 4 victims connected to one isn't enough. Ava agreed. Because he was right. It wasn't enough. Not yet. The meeting ended without any major decisions. No warrants. No raids. No press conferences. Just another lead added to a growing pile of possibilities. Most detectives moved on. Ava didn't. Chapter 11, The Boxes. Westbridge had been closed for over a decade. Its records had been transferred to municipal archives. Thousands of documents. Attendance records. Case files. Volunteer applications. Incident reports. Personnel reviews. Boxes upon boxes of forgotten paper. The archive employee looked overwhelmed when Ava submitted her request. All of it. Ava nodded. The woman laughed. That'll take days. Maybe weeks. The task force couldn't spare weeks. They had another murder investigation to run. Media scrutiny was increasing. Political pressure was increasing. Everything was accelerating. Which was how Ava found herself staring at 6 archive boxes sitting beside her desk late on a Friday evening. Technically, she wasn't supposed to remove them from the building. Not without approval. Not without documentation. Not without following procedure. But she had a justification ready. Immediately. Effortlessly. I'll review them over the weekend. I'll save the department time. I'll bring them back Monday. Nothing leaves my possession. Nothing is compromised. No harm done. Reasonable. Practical. Understandable. Still against protocol. Ava loaded the boxes into her trunk and drove home. Analysis. Most ethical compromises don't feel like compromises. They feel like solutions. That's what makes them dangerous. If wrongdoing announced itself clearly, few people would engage in it. Instead, it arrives disguised as efficiency. Necessity. Pragmatism. Ava wasn't trying to break rules. She was trying to help, which is exactly how these stories usually begin. Chapter 12, The Apartment. The first box contained nothing useful. Attendance sheets. Meal schedules. Maintenance requests. Bureaucratic clutter. The second wasn't much better. Budget reports. Staff evaluations. Insurance paperwork. By midnight, Ava was exhausted. Frustrated. Questioning whether she'd wasted her weekend. Then she opened the third box. Inside was a photo album. Old. Dusty. Forgotten. The kind organizations create to impress donors. Smiling teenagers. Fundraising events. Holiday parties. Community outreach programs. Pictures nobody had looked at in years. Ava flipped through it casually. At first. Then more slowly. Because halfway through the album, she found herself staring at someone familiar. Herself. 15 years younger. Standing beside a group of teenagers. Smiling. Confident. Hopeful. The image felt surreal. Like looking at a stranger wearing her face. She hadn't thought about Westbridge in years. Maybe longer. Yet suddenly, memories began surfacing. Not clearly. Fragments. Pieces. Moments. Conversations. Laughter. Hallways. Names. Faces. And beneath all of them, a feeling. Chapter 13, The Boy and the Foe. Ava studied the picture carefully. There were 13 teenagers in the frame. Most meant nothing to her. Not anymore. Time had erased them. But one stood out. Not because she recognized him. Because she almost did. Dark hair. Thin frame. Standing slightly apart from everyone else. Not isolated. Just cautious. As though he wasn't entirely comfortable being included. Ava couldn't stop looking at him. Something about him felt important. The feeling intensified when she turned the photograph over. Names had been written on the back. One beneath each face. She scanned them slowly. Reading each one. Waiting for something to click. Nothing. 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 Then she reached one particular name. And froze. Not because she remembered who he was. Because she remembered trying not to. Analysis. Memory often returns in stages. Not facts. Not details. Emotions. Reactions. Instincts. The name meant something. Enough to trigger recognition. Enough to trigger discomfort. Enough to stop her cold. But not enough to explain why. Not yet. And sometimes, not yet can be far more dangerous than never. End of Part 2. Part 3, The Things We Bury. Chapter 14, The Name. Ava slept less than 2 hours. Not because she was working. Because she couldn't stop thinking. The photograph remained on her kitchen table. The same image. The same faces. The same name. Every time she looked at it, she felt the same sensation. Recognition. Followed immediately by resistance. As though her mind wanted to remember and forget simultaneously. By morning, she was frustrated. The feeling made no sense. Detectives dealt in facts, evidence, witnesses, documentation, not feelings. And yet this entire investigation seemed determined to drag her somewhere emotional, somewhere personal, somewhere she did not want to go. Analysis. One of the greatest myths about trauma is that people suppress memories because they are weak. The opposite is often true. The mind hides things because it is trying to protect itself, not from the event, from the meaning of the event. And sometimes the meaning is far more frightening than the memory itself. Chapter 15, Victim Number 5. The fifth victim was discovered on a Monday. Male. 59. Retired social worker. The news hit the task force like a punch to the stomach. Not because another victim had died. Because this victim shattered the emerging pattern. At least initially. The previous victims all shared connections to Westbridge. This man didn't. At least not according to initial records. Which meant one of two things. Either investigators were wrong about the pattern, or they were missing something. Ava immediately began reviewing his history. Employment records, volunteer work, personal associations. Anything. Nothing. Then, 6 hours later, Trevor found it. A photograph. 20 years old. Taken at a state conference involving juvenile rehabilitation programs. Westbridge representatives were present, including the victim. The room went silent. Because the pattern hadn't broken. It had expanded. Chapter 16, The Mirror. This time, the killer left something different. Not just a drawing. Not just a note. A real mirror. Small. Cheap. Unremarkable. Placed carefully beside the victim. Etched into the glass were 3 words. Look closer, detective. For the first time, the message was clearly directed at Ava. Not law enforcement. Not the media. Not the public. Her. The room suddenly felt smaller. The killer knew who she was, which raised a terrifying possibility. Had he always known? Chapter 17, Justification. The captain wanted Ava removed. Temporarily. Nothing punitive. Nothing permanent. Standard procedure. The killer was communicating directly with her. That made her involved. Potentially compromised. The recommendation made perfect sense. Ava hated it immediately. Not because she disagreed. Because she knew he was right. And that frightened her. She sat alone in her office for nearly an hour after the meeting. Thinking. Rationalizing. Arguing with herself. Then she reached a conclusion. A conclusion she would later regret. The killer wants me off the case. Reasonable. Removing me helps him. Also reasonable. The best thing I can do is stay involved. Again reasonable. One justification. Built on top of another. Built on top of another. Eventually, she convinced herself. Not because the logic was flawless. Because it was good enough. And good enough is often all human beings require. Analysis. Ava believed she was protecting the investigation. I believe she was protecting herself. Those aren't always the same thing. She had become emotionally invested. Attached. Curious. Obsessed. The possibility of being removed didn't merely threaten the case. It threatened her need for answers. And human beings become remarkably creative when defending something they need. Chapter 18, The File. That evening Ava returned to the Westbridge records. This time with purpose. No more vague feelings. No more intuition. No more uncertainty. She wanted the truth. Hours passed. Names. Reports. Incident summaries. Disciplinary records. Counseling notes. Then she found it. A file. Thin. Almost empty. Only a handful of pages. A teenager. 14 years old. Multiple abuse allegations involving prior placements. Behavioral concerns. Isolation. Difficulty trusting adults. And one handwritten note attached near the back. Volunteer mentor assigned. Progress observed. Responds positively to detective intern Ava Reyes. Ava stopped breathing. Not because she suddenly remembered everything. Because she remembered enough. A hallway. A conversation. A frightened boy trying not to look frightened. A notebook. A drawing. A mirror. The memory hit her so hard, she nearly dropped the file. For the first time since the murders began, she wasn't looking at evidence. She was looking at someone she had known. Chapter 19, the phone call. Her phone rang at 11:43 p.m. Unknown number. She answered automatically. Silence. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then breathing. Slow. Calm. Steady. Ava's pulse quickened. Who is this? No response. Just breathing. Then finally a voice. Quiet. Almost gentle. You're getting closer. The line disconnected. Ava sat frozen. Because she recognized the voice. Not consciously. Not completely. The way someone recognizes a song they haven't heard in 15 years. A fragment. A shadow. A ghost. And somewhere deep inside her mind, a buried memory finally began clawing its way to the surface. End of part 3. For 15 years, Ava Reyes had believed Westbridge was a closed chapter. A success story. A place where she helped people. A place she left behind. She was wrong. Because somewhere in those forgotten hallways, a boy she once tried to save had been paying attention. Listening. Learning. Watching. And the closer Ava got to remembering him, the closer he got to revealing himself. The next chapter wouldn't reveal the killer. Not yet. It would reveal something much worse. Why he chose his victims. And why Detective Ava Reyes was always intended to be the final witness. Part 4, the lesson. Chapter 20, the thing about monsters. Most people imagine serial killers begin with violence. A traumatic event. A moment of cruelty. A dark urge. A decision. Something obvious. Something dramatic. Something easy to point at. Reality is rarely that clean. More often, the beginning looks ordinary. A conversation. A belief. A lesson. A sentence spoken at the wrong time to the wrong person. The terrifying thing about influence is that we rarely control what people learn from us. Only what we intended to teach. And those are not always the same thing. Chapter 21, the boy who drew mirrors. The next morning, Ava called in sick. The decision bothered her. She hadn't taken a mental health day in nearly 3 years. Not because she didn't need one. Because she didn't trust herself to stop. Detectives become addicted to momentum. Cases move. Leads disappear. Witnesses forget. Time matters. But this wasn't about the case anymore. Not entirely. This was about memory. And memory wasn't cooperating. Ava sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by Westbridge records. Photographs. Reports. Incident summaries. Volunteer logs. One file remained open. The same file she'd stared at the night before. The same file that contained the note mentioning her. A teenager. Age 14. History of abuse. Multiple placements. Behavioral concerns. Repeated observations regarding social withdrawal. Ava reread the file 3 times. Then 4. Then 5. Something felt wrong. Not with what was written. With what wasn't. Large portions were missing. Entire months undocumented. Reports referenced incidents that weren't included. Names appeared without explanation. Pages were gone. Someone had removed material. Years ago. Long before the murders. Long before anyone knew the case would matter. And suddenly, Ava found herself asking a different question. Not who is the killer, but what happened at Westbridge? Analysis. People often become obsessed with the wrong mystery. The murders felt like the mystery. The bodies. The notes. The mirrors. But those were symptoms. The real mystery existed years earlier. At Westbridge, the murders were not the story. The murders were the aftermath. Chapter 22, The Counselor. By late afternoon, Ava tracked down one of Westbridge's former counselors. Linda Mercer. 67 years old. Retired. Living alone. The woman almost refused to speak. Not because she was hostile. Because she was nervous. That immediately caught Ava's attention. People don't get nervous discussing programs that closed 12 years ago. Unless something happened there. Something they never forgot. The interview began normally. Questions about staffing. Funding. Administration. Then Ava mentioned the boy from the file. The reaction was immediate. Linda's expression changed. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. The same recognition Ava had been experiencing for weeks. You remember him. It wasn't a question. Linda sighed. Looked away. Then nodded. Some kids stay with you. Why? The woman hesitated. For nearly 10 seconds. Then answered. Because nobody ever helped him. Ava frowned. The file says he improved. Linda laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was. That's what the reports say. The statement hung in the air. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Dangerous. Chapter 23, The Story THEY Told. According to Westbridge records, the boy's time there had been considered a success. Behavior improved. Trust improved. Academic performance improved. A positive outcome. A rehabilitation story. The kind donors love. The kind administrators advertise. The kind organizations use in fundraising brochures. Linda didn't believe any of it. He learned how to survive. Ava remained silent. Linda continued. People confuse survival with healing. The words landed harder than either woman expected. Because they felt true. Not just about the boy. About a lot of people. Chapter 24, The DRAWNGS. Then Linda mentioned something that made Ava's stomach tighten. The mirrors. The boy drew mirrors constantly. Not houses. Not animals. Not superheroes. Mirrors. Hundreds of them. Every notebook. Every worksheet. Every scrap of paper. Mirrors. Ava felt something shift inside her. A memory. Not complete. Just a fragment. A classroom. A rainy afternoon. A teenage boy sketching in silence. Mirror after mirror after mirror. The memory vanished as quickly as it appeared. But it was enough. Enough to know Linda was telling the truth. Chapter 25, The Lesson. Then came the moment that changed everything. The moment Ava would replay in her head thousands of times. The moment she would eventually discuss in therapy. The moment that began breaking her. Linda asked a question. Simple. Direct. Do you remember what you told him? Ava shook her head. No. Linda looked genuinely surprised. Then saddened. Because she remembered. Perfectly. He worshipped you. Ava immediately rejected the idea. No. You were the first adult who listened. No. You were the first adult who treated him like a person. No. The word came out louder this time. More emotional. More defensive. Linda continued anyway. One day, he came to you after another incident. Ava's pulse accelerated. Pieces of memory began surfacing. Still fragmented. Still incomplete. You told him something. The room suddenly felt warmer. Smaller. Harder to breathe in. Linda closed her eyes. Remembering. Then repeated the sentence. The exact sentence. Word for word. The world only gets better when good people stop looking away. Silence. Absolute silence. Ava felt her stomach drop. Because she remembered saying it. Not clearly. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough to know it happened. Enough to know it was real. Enough to know she meant it. Dr. Chin analysis. It is impossible to predict how another human being will interpret your words. Especially a child. Especially a traumatized child. Especially a child desperate for meaning. Ava intended the lesson as encouragement. Responsibility. Compassion. Courage. But intentions do not control outcomes. And outcomes do not care about intentions. Chapter 26, The Envelope. When Ava returned home that evening, an envelope sat on her doorstep. No stamp. No return address. Just her name. Written neatly across the front. She already knew who it was from. Before she opened it. Before she touched it. Before she stepped inside. She knew. Inside was a single photograph. Nothing else. No note. No threat. No explanation. Just a photograph. Westbridge Youth Services. 15 years earlier. A younger Ava standing beside a teenage boy. The same boy from the file. The same boy from the memories. The same boy from the drawings. For the first time, the audience could clearly see him. And on the back of the photograph were 6 words. You taught me not to look away. Ava stared at the sentence for nearly an hour. Because deep down, she already understood something terrible. The killer wasn't simply contacting her. He wasn't taunting her. He wasn't threatening her. He was thanking her. End of part 4. By now, Detective Ava Reyes understood something the rest of the task force did not. The killer's messages were not random. The mirrors were not random. The victims were not random. And neither was she. Somewhere in the city, a man she once believed she had helped was carrying out a mission he genuinely believed was righteous. A mission inspired by lessons she never intended to teach. The next chapter would reveal the first crack in Ava's moral certainty. Because for the first time in her life, she would deliberately withhold evidence from an active homicide investigation. And the reason she gave herself would sound perfectly reasonable. Excellent, this is where the story becomes dangerous. Up until now, Ava has still been fundamentally operating as a detective. She's investigating, following leads, trying to understand. But part 5 is where she knowingly crosses a line. Not a huge line. Not a corrupt top line. A believable line. The kind of line thousands of good people cross every day because they convince themselves it's temporary. And that's exactly why it matters. Part 5, The First Lie. Chapter 27, The Evidence Locker. There is a moment in many investigations that never appears in documentaries. A moment before the cover-up. Before the scandal. Before the disaster. A moment so small most people wouldn't even recognize it. The first lie. Not a lie told to others. A lie told to yourself. Those are the dangerous ones. Because once you believe your own explanation, everything afterward becomes easier. For Detective Ava Reyes, that moment arrived the morning after the photograph appeared. She brought the photograph to work, then sat in her car for 23 minutes, staring at it, thinking, arguing with herself, because she knew exactly what protocol required. The photograph was evidence, relevant evidence, potentially critical evidence, which meant she should immediately submit it, document it, inform the task force, inform her captain, inform internal affairs. Simple, straightforward, professional. Instead, she slipped the photograph back into the envelope and walked into the building without telling anyone. Analysis. People often imagine ethical failures feel dramatic. They don't. Most feel practical, reasonable, necessary. Ava wasn't trying to obstruct justice, at least not in her mind. She was trying to buy time. And buying time has justified countless bad decisions throughout human history. Chapter 28, The Reason. The justification came easily. Too easily. I don't even know what this means yet. Reasonable. Reporting it now will create chaos. Also reasonable. Once I understand what's happening, I'll tell them everything. Again reasonable. One explanation stacked neatly on top of another. A structure built from logic. Or something that looked enough like logic to be convincing. By lunchtime, Ava had completely convinced herself she was doing the right thing. Which was unfortunate. Because convincing ourselves is often the point of no return. Chapter 29, The Task Force. The briefing that afternoon felt different. Everyone was tired. Everyone was frustrated. And everyone was scared. Because the killer had evolved. The notes were becoming more direct. More personal. More confident. The latest victim had generated national attention. The mayor wanted answers. The media wanted answers. The public wanted answers. Nobody had any. Trevor presented updated findings. The victim list now contained 6 names. Everyone connected to Westbridge. Not necessarily employees. Not necessarily abusers. Just connected. A network. A web. A history. The task force believed they were finally identifying the killer's hunting ground. What they didn't know was that Ava already possessed information capable of changing the entire investigation. Information she wasn't sharing. And every minute she remained silent made the next confession harder. Chapter 30, The Visit. That evening Ava returned to Linda Mercer. The retired counselor seemed unsurprised to see her. In fact, she looked like she'd been expecting it. Which bothered Ava immediately. How much did you tell me yesterday? Linda studied her carefully. Not enough. The answer irritated Ava. Because it sounded rehearsed. Prepared. Almost guilty. For the first time, Ava began wondering whether the former staff members knew more than they admitted. A lot more. Chapter 31, The Incident Report. Linda disappeared into another room. When she returned, she carried a faded folder. Old. Damaged. Almost falling apart. She placed it on the table. Without opening it. Without speaking. The hesitation alone told Ava this mattered. Finally, Linda pushed the folder toward her. You won't find this in the archives. Ava frowned. Why not? The older woman looked away. Because she already knew the answer. And she hated it. It was removed. The room went silent. Slowly Ava opened the folder. Inside was an incident report. One she had never seen before. One that should have been in the official records. One that was. The report described allegations against multiple staff members. intimidation, neglect, psychological mistreatment. Not enough for criminal charges, but enough to raise serious concerns. Enough to trigger investigations. Enough to make donors nervous. Enough to damage reputations. Enough to disappear. Analysis. Organizations rarely collapse because of one terrible act. More often they collapse because many people convince themselves a problem isn't serious enough to confront. Some stay silent to protect careers. Some stay silent to protect institutions. Some stay silent because they believe someone else will act. The result is usually the same. Nothing changes. Chapter 32, The Name That Kept Appearing. Ava read the report twice, then 3 times. One detail stood out immediately. A particular staff member's name appeared repeatedly. Not accused directly. Not implicated directly. Just present. Again. And again. And again. Every incident somehow led back to him. Every complaint crossed his desk. Every investigation stalled around him. A gatekeeper. A bottleneck. A man who always seemed to be standing near the truth, yet somehow never touched by it. Ava wrote his name down, then circled it 3 times, because for the first time since the murders began, she believed she understood the victims. Not who they were, why they were chosen. Chapter 33, The Message. That night, another message arrived. Not a photograph this time. An email, sent from an untraceable account. No greeting. No signature. Just one sentence. Have you figured out why they deserved it? Ava stared at the screen. For a long time. Because the question itself revealed something important. The killer wasn't acting randomly. He wasn't acting impulsively. He wasn't seeking attention. He believed he was delivering justice. Not revenge. Justice. And that distinction terrified her. Because true believers are often the most dangerous people in the world. Chapter 34, The Mirror Cracks. That night Ava didn't sleep. Instead, she sat alone in her apartment. The photograph on one side of the table. The incident report on the other. 2 versions of the same story. One official. One hidden. One clean. One ugly. And somewhere between them stood a teenage boy who had spent years watching adults justify their decisions. Adults who looked away. Adults who compromised. Adults who explained. Adults who rationalized. Adults who told themselves they were good people. Ava suddenly felt sick. Because she recognized the pattern. Not in Westbridge. In herself. The photograph remained hidden. The evidence remained hidden. The truth remained hidden. And every reason she gave herself sounded disturbingly familiar. For the first time since the investigation began, Ava asked herself a question she didn't want to answer. What if Daniel wasn't the only person justifying things? End of part 5. The case was no longer simply a hunt for a killer. It had become a confrontation with the past. A confrontation with memory. With guilt. With silence. And somewhere in the darkness, the mirror man was watching. Waiting. Because Ava was finally approaching the truth. The truth about Westbridge. The truth about Daniel. And the truth about the event that transformed a wounded teenager into the man now terrorizing the city. And when that truth emerged, everything Ava believed about justice would begin to fall apart. Part 9, The Mirror. Chapter 40, The Last Piece. The evidence arrived on a Thursday. 3 days after Ava crossed the line. 3 days after she destroyed the document. 3 days after she convinced herself it was necessary. The irony would haunt her for years. Because the evidence she sacrificed her integrity to protect turned out to be unnecessary. A forensic accountant working parallel leads uncovered financial records connecting multiple former Westbridge administrators. The records confirmed everything: cover-ups, misconduct, suppressed complaints, hidden settlements, enough to destroy reputations, enough to reopen investigations, enough to expose the truth. The case would have moved forward without Ava's decision. She just didn't know it at the time. That realization hit harder than any accusation ever could. Because for the first time, Ava couldn't hide behind necessity. She had crossed the line willingly. And she hadn't needed to. Analysis. One of the most painful discoveries a person can make is that their wrongdoing was unnecessary. If an action saves a life, people can argue about morality. If an action changes nothing, all that remains is responsibility. Chapter 41, The Location. The breakthrough came 48 hours later. Not through brilliance. Not through luck. Through Daniel. The final clue arrived in a plain envelope. No return address. No fingerprints. No DNA. Inside was a single photograph. An old classroom. Westbridge. The same room where Ava had spent countless afternoons mentoring troubled teenagers. The same room where Daniel had spent countless afternoons drawing mirrors. Written on the back, one last lesson. Below it, an address. Nothing else. Chapter 42, The Return. The building should have been demolished years ago. Instead, it sat abandoned. Forgotten. Rotting. Nature reclaiming what people had left behind. Ava arrived alone, which violated procedure. Again. But by now procedure felt like a distant memory. The sun was setting. Long shadows stretched across cracked pavement. The old sign still hung crookedly near the entrance. WSTBRIDG, Youth SCRVICES. The words felt like a gravestone. Chapter 43, The Classroom. The classroom remained almost exactly as she remembered. Dust covered everything. Desks. Shelves. Windowsills. Time had frozen the room. Waiting. At the center sat a single metal chair. Facing the front. Waiting. Beside it stood a cardboard box. A tape recorder. And a mirror. Ava's heart sank. Because she already knew. Daniel wasn't here. Chapter 44, The Recording. The tape recorder clicked to life. Then his voice filled the room. Older. Calmer. More confident. But unmistakably him. Hello, Ava. The room suddenly felt smaller. I thought about meeting you face to face. Pause. Then I realized that would defeat the purpose. Ava listened silently. You spent years teaching me to look closely. Pause. Most people don't. They see what they want to see. They believe what makes them comfortable. They tell themselves stories. The words landed harder than she wanted to admit, because she knew exactly where this was going. Chapter 45, THE Lesson. The recording continued. When I was 14, I thought the problem was bad people. Pause. Then I got older, and I realized the problem was everyone else. Ava closed her eyes. Not agreeing. Not accepting. Just listening. I watched people ignore things. I watched people explain things. I watched people justify things. The next sentence nearly stopped her breathing. Just like you did. Silence. Long enough to hurt. You crossed your line. Ava looked toward the box, already knowing what waited inside. Chapter 46, The Box. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside sat a folder. Photographs. Documents. Copies. Evidence. Proof. Proof she had concealed evidence. Proof she had withheld information. Proof she had destroyed records. Proof she had compromised the investigation. Every step documented. Every decision recorded. Every justification preserved. Daniel had been watching. Not every second. Not every move. Just enough. Enough to know. Enough to predict. Enough to prepare. Analysis. The most frightening people are not always the smartest. Sometimes they are simply the most observant. Daniel spent 15 years studying a single question. Not how to kill. Not how to evade police. How people justify themselves. And by the end of the investigation, he knew Ava's answer. Before she did. Chapter 47, the final letter. Beneath the evidence sat a handwritten letter. Ava unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was familiar. Steady. Deliberate. Patient. The letter read, "When I was 14, you told me something. You said the world only gets better when good people stop looking away. I believed you. The problem was that I kept watching. I watched adults ignore suffering. I watched institutions protect themselves. I watched investigations disappear. I watched everyone explain why they couldn't act. Everyone had a reason. Everyone had a justification. Everyone had a line. They just didn't know where it was until they crossed it." Ava's hands trembled. She kept reading. "I spent years wondering if you were different. Now we both know the answer." The final sentence sat alone at the bottom. A sentence that would stay with her for the rest of her life. "You finally looked." Chapter 48, the mirror. The mirror sat beside the empty box. Small. Plain. Ordinary. Ava stared at her reflection. For a long time. Not because she saw Daniel. Because she saw herself. The detective. The mentor. The investigator. The woman who believed she understood justice. And for the first time, she saw something else. A human being. Flawed. Complicated. Capable of mistakes. Capable of rationalization. Capable of crossing lines. Just like everyone else. Chapter 49, the ghost. Daniel was never found. No arrest. No trial. No conviction. No body. Nothing. The largest manhunt in state history eventually slowed. Then stalled. Then ended. Officially. Unofficially, nobody stopped looking. Including Ava. For a while. Chapter 50, the sighting. 8 months later, a transit officer in another state submitted routine surveillance footage. A man walking through a train station. Nothing unusual. Nothing criminal. Just a man. The image quality was terrible. The face partially obscured. Most investigators dismissed it immediately. Ava didn't. Because she knew. Not from certainty. From recognition. The same recognition that had started everything. The same feeling. The same certainty she couldn't prove. Daniel was alive. And gone. Chapter 51, the resignation. A year later, Detective Ava Reyes resigned. Not because she was forced to. Not because anyone discovered the full truth. Because she could no longer separate the badge from the mirror. Every case reminded her. Every investigation reminded her. Every justification reminded her. Eventually, she walked away. Voluntarily. Quietly. Permanently. Analysis. Years later, sitting across from me, Ava asked a question. Not about Daniel. Not about Westbridge. Not about the murders. About herself. She asked, "Does crossing a line make you a bad person?" I thought about the question for a long time. Then I answered honestly. No. The room remained silent. Then I added, but refusing to acknowledge it might. Ava nodded, not because she found peace, because she understood. And sometimes understanding is the closest thing we get. Closing. The names and identifying details in this story have been changed to protect client confidentiality. But the lesson remains. Most people believe they know exactly who they are, until life hands them a mirror. This has been another entry from the Westlake Files. End file. And somewhere, far away, a man who once drew mirrors in the margins of his notebooks continued walking through crowds unnoticed. Watching, learning, waiting for the day another file would open.